Welcome to the Inspired Living with Autoimmunity podcast, the podcast for high achievers who want to stay sharp, focused, and full of energy despite their diagnosis. With your host, National Board Certified Functional Medicine Health Coach, Julie Michelson, where Julie helps you take your power back from autoimmunity. And now here's your host, Julie Michelson.
Welcome back to the Inspired Living with Autoimmunity podcast. I'm your host, Julie Michelson. And today we are joined by Dr. Michelle Veneziano, founder of flowismedicine.com. In our conversation, we discuss osteopathy, the integration of the physical body and the subtle body, and heart-body coherence. Dr. Veneziano gives us practices to enhance our capability for healing as she reinforces that healing is accessible through alignment with the natural world. Dr. Veneziano, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me.
I am really excited for this conversation. And I know listeners are going to get so much out of it. I always love to have you share a little bit of your journey first before we get into the rest of our content. How did you get to, I know before I hit record, you were like, I'm really an educator. That's what I am. So tell me a little bit of your story.
Oh, goodness. Okay. Well, I feel like my calling to medicine was just that. I almost remember as a teenager not really being clear about what my purpose. And then I remember the moment I was actually walking across a courtyard at my high school, and it's almost like I got hit by lightning or something. And a voice said, "You're going to be a doctor." And I didn't really know what that meant, but it's really been quite a spiritual journey. And I was not in my body. That's the defining, overarching thing. I did not know that my moving toward medicine was going to be a journey of getting into my body. Didn't even know what that meant. Struggled a lot in school with health stuff early on. And, at the time I didn't realize that that was my learning path and that it was almost a necessary, trial by fire to really deeply learn what healing and what an awakening journey, a consciousness journey is really all about. So I had all the things. I was sensitive, right? Nobody gets a lightning bolt and has a conversation with God if they're not sort of sensitive and kind of tuned into something larger. And so all the things that kind of manifest when a person is incompatible with a concretized culture. My system had a really hard time, and I ended up having a pretty massive autoimmune response when in my pregnancy. And there was an embodiment piece to that because my TSH was actually normal. I'm talking about a thyroid condition, thyroid stimulating hormone. And I had a sense that I knew something was not right. Something's not right. I knew it was my thyroid. I was already tapping into my intuition before even really knowing what that was. And so I asked for more labs, and my antibodies were through the roof. Isn't that so interesting? So in that sense, I began to I knew that I needed to think deeper than the cookbook version of how you approach any condition. And I learned to trust my body's knowing over what the books say. So that was a wonderful launching pad. So my background is family medicine. I was a hospitalist for a period of time, and that was that was part of it. I actually remember one shift where I had ridiculously high patient load, and I just didn't really breathe or drink water or take breaks. And I just thought, I can do this. I had been doing it for years and years. Yeah. And then my body was like, yeah, no. And I literally went from feeling like a superhero that could do anything to the complete opposite. And I had a series of years where I just really struggled with fatigue. I knew I had mold illness because I was living here in Marin County, and there's a reason we have the sourest sourdough in the world. It's a place where if you're not robust, people travel to dry climates to have a relief from environmental burden. And so here was the perfect place for the perfect storm. And then that shows up as fill in the blank. Maybe you have Lyme, maybe you have so all of that, the whole load, that when I hear people talk about it, I'm like, okay, we're in this territory. The way I approach it is we need to get back in our bodies, because once we do that, we literally have stronger electrical flow and can hold coherence and stability in our nervous systems, both the physical and subtle body. And I think it's a really optimistic view, because the burdens of the world, the stress, the environmental toxins, people's limited availability to nutritious, clean food, clean water, clean air, is not moving in a great direction, right? So I see that all in a sort of meta sense as a calling to really step into our power and literally cultivate the ability to radiate our personal energy, to almost create a force field and to create a coherence in the body. And of course, the heart is so related to all of this. I hope we get to talk about that, where we're actually transmitting into the world something really of a higher level of awareness and, connection to nature, and almost like we learn from one another. In neuroscience, we talk so much about mirroring and mirror neurons, and without really understanding the mechanism of how we exchange information. And it's so deep and such a beautiful topic. So yeah, I'm all about that, and the transmitting of those ideas in simple ways that hopefully I will manage to do with you today. So I have a story that I think is a really beautiful way to illustrate this idea of embodiment and integration between the physical and electrical aspects of ourselves. So early in my training, I just, took the opportunity to work with patients when I could on this level of working with the electrical body, which was quite a new concept for me early in my training. However, I sat with masters, and I believe I received a mirroring experience with my mentors, where whatever it was that allowed them to connect with the consciousness or subtle body expression in patients, it's almost like a channel on a dial. I managed to touch what that was, and my system registered and remembered what that was. So I really, really didn't know much more than that. I would call it some ability to touch deep presence and stillness. And I had one amazing treatment experience with one of my first private patients while I was in my family practice residency. I don't know if I'll tell that story now, but once we had this, whatever magic happens when you touch into that thing, he said, would you please treat my roommate? She's really in trouble. She's his dance partner, and was very physical. And then suddenly this whole horrendous body pain. She had a rheumatoid arthritis diagnosis, and she had these films that looked terrible, and she thought her whole life was over. And this was a bit of a complexity outside of what I would say my expertise was at the time, non-existent. And I said, I'll try and see if I can connect with her where It's like when you sit in that stillness and you're connected to the earth and the cosmos, and you just feel so integrated with reality. And then the patient comes in and they're not. You can't feel them. It's almost like now I would look at it as a physical and subtle body dissociation, as if you're watching a 3D movie without the glasses, and you have these two different layers that aren't blended. And so she comes in, she's hysterical. She's sure her life is over. She lays down, put my hands on, do my grounding, do my touching into that particular frequency that I received. And it was 2 hours. This is unprecedented. 2 hours of feeling absolutely nothing. And then at the 2-hour mark, I felt this little spark. And now looking back, we have terms for these things in osteopathy. We consider there a pilot light in the third ventricle of the skull, of the brain. And there are terms for these in Chinese medicine and Vedic philosophy that I actually can't pronounce. And has to do with the kidney-heart channel communication, but I don't quite understand it. I feel it. I'm more interested in what it feels like than what it's called.
Right.
Sure. And that was that. That was that. It was almost like her system rebooted, and I think I treated her one more time, and the whole conversation just disappeared. Rheumatoid became not a diagnosis in her world.
Which is amazing. And I was nodding along as you were saying that, as somebody who had that diagnosis as well, and that outlook of life is over and over a decade of decline. I do believe there is a tendency, it's like chicken or egg, right? Of course, I'm sure there was some disassociation before the diagnosis, but I think that living with the chronic pain and this idea of this is my identity and I have this label and life is, declining, and the death sentence kind of outlook, if you will, also really causes that disassociation where, so I love I do understand that there was a piece of that already there, but I do think that we reach this state where that's what happens, almost as a protective mechanism, right? Mm-hmm. But then it blocks the healing. And so I love that. I want to circle back because I think it's really important for listeners to understand best you can, what is osteopathy? I know.
Oh my goodness. In a nutshell.
You are a doctor of it. So see if you can tell us what it is.
Absolutely. It's such a magical story. Back in the 1800s, there was a frontier doctor named Andrew Taylor Still who had an insight that the body is a system that, if functioning well mechanically, can pretty much self-correct. And that was brilliant and beautiful and all about actual healing and not about an industry of medicine. And then around the turn of the century, there was a whole kind of influx of, we're going to be very, structured and systematic about medicine. And that's the beginning of the allopathic approach. Well, let's just say he was working with medicines and surgery, and he could see this is not what's really going to ultimately serve optimal wellness. So the whole of our culture went toward this allopathic approach. Medical schools were formed for the first time. You were restricted in your ability to practice anything outside of that standard of care. And for many decades, he fought and was successful in creating a profession that was a contrast to that approach, the osteopathic profession. Around the time of the 60s, with all of the politics and the way that medicine was moving toward what it is now, quite a bit of political and financial focus, the professions were moving toward blending into one, and DOs in the 60s could actually trade in a degree and yet an MD degree if they were deemed trained appropriately. And there was a number of Dr. Still's students that held out, or students of his students that said, no, we must maintain this. And they became keepers of a flame that then evolved into a focus of traditional osteopathy that does exist today, and technically is statistically insignificant in the context of the number of DOs that exist in the world, most of which practice pretty much indistinguishably from MDs. So it's confusing for patients because they're like, oh, well, my surgeon's a DO. That must mean he may, well, truthfully, he may or may not have retained any of the original, philosophy and approach. Although most DOs in medicine do have a bit more of a orientation toward humanness, communication, contact. Yeah, go ahead.
And I do think that the premise, right, it was, why do you choose to become a DO versus an MD is perhaps this, idea, a true knowing that the body can heal.
Well, we have a joke. We talk about maybe a third in a medical school class of maybe 150 kids, we have a third that absolutely love the idea of the traditional osteopathy and intend to pursue it, most of whom find that it's very difficult to do side by side with all the requirements of medical education. I think 5% of our class went on to pursue it. And then we have a third that think it's a good idea, but really aren't likely to ever get around to it. Oh, it's a great idea. I'm too busy. And then we have a third, and I have compassion for all of that. We have a third that chose it because maybe it was slightly easier to get in than MD schools, and they liked the location. It just worked. It was logistically aligned. Yeah. So it's very confusing for patients to really decipher what osteopathy means, because it means different things to different people. And, and then to, understand the relevance or not relevance of the fact that their doctor has a DO degree. It's very confusing for patients. I'm sorry, patients. We're all patients.
Which is why I asked.
Yeah,
because,
for sure.
Yeah, it's a question that gets thrown my way a lot. So I wanted to hear your take on it.
Description.
I don't I don't have one other than I do tend to think. But of course, it's always what is our experience, right? And so it's the DOs that are in my world definitely do have that approach of, the body does have the ability to heal, and there's and not that like single system, oh, this is your GI tract and this is your heart. And, there is this kind of whole body medicine, I think, as just kind of a theme across the board. And so, that's totally not an educated answer. That's an experiential answer.
Absolutely. Yeah. I agree with you. I've worked with a lot of DOs, and obviously in the medical setting, their DOs are in every sector, and they tend to be more relatable, more kind of, oriented toward humanity. And MDs, many MDs are also such. So I don't want to put down.
Right. Nobody's bashing MDs. No, it's just more.
Absolutely not.
Yeah. I've heard questions that run the gamut. Was that a real doctor? Is that, just all kinds of questions. And so my experience as well, across the board is I didn't realize numbers were so small as far as the hands-on and manual therapy. But that's where all of that kind of comes from anyway. People don't realize that chiropractic didn't just pop up as its own thing. So osteopathy has definitely contributed a lot, I think, to where medicine is going now.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I really look at osteopathy as almost like how does nature actually work and manifest as a body? And in fact, that we're all born experts in all of that. And we forget in our culture. And at this point, I'm seeing few patients. I'm focusing on actually educating people, doctors and patients, in how it is relating to that story of that woman where she activated what we call the pilot light, and which is really a spark for the whole central channel around which all of the physical and subtle body anatomy are oriented. How do we actually manifest that in ourselves? Because we can. And Qigong and yoga all relate to this. And I'll speak to it. All of the traditional lineages have their version of supporting subtle body, physical body integration. And we can do so much of it ourselves. Once I had this revelation, because I was sitting in my office, many years of nose to the grindstone, single mom with, not really just managing my patients and my child. And I started to see that I was treating a lot. Oh, as I healed myself, I began to learn what behaviors actually support this full expression of, wellness in the body. I had a lot of support, but until I got into my body and actually moment by moment oriented my behaviors, breath, grounding, actually feeling every cell in my body, I didn't hold any treatments, really. It's like they didn't even really penetrate. Supplement regimens, energy therapies from devices, they all could have an effect where they could bring the body into coherence,
Right.
but it wouldn't last. So my idea is, rather than arrive there occasionally after our Qigong practice or a yoga class or a healing from another person, how do we actually live there? As in each moment. And then I began to train my patients to hold their treatments, and they began to need fewer of them, which let me open up my practice and just have more experience. Because if you're digging people out of a hole and they become like, oh, my osteopath is going to fix this thing, we actually can have very small patient censuses. What's the plural of that word? And it's a little bit, I would say, almost we're underutilized, and it's even a little codependent. We can all healers can end up being a little bit codependent. How I figured out that was happening is that I started to get really bored. Like, what's wrong with this picture? This is not challenging for me. This feels not so exciting. And once I started to teach people, like, you can actually do this, and it's fun and amazing and really easy. And it's also our native setting to get back into integration. So once people feel that and realize they can perpetuate it, they begin to have a really colorful journey of communication with their bodies, and they begin to have more, what I would say, evidence of arriving and actually existing in present time and space. Is that a lot of synchronicity begins to happen, a lot of creativity comes out, a lot of curiosity and optimism in despite the difficulties in the world. It's almost like I'm mobilizing myself to be of service. It's like we get full with all this beautiful life force, and then we just want to give it out. So we become very oriented to service. So in a way, I feel like, oh, this is really ultimately about service in the world, which is, I think, the highest nutrient of our soul. And I actually think it heals our digestion, and it heals all of our tissues. And it's really the source of that magical piece that, we hear about these hospitals in China, where no matter what a person's condition, they have over 95% success by addressing this, what's the word I'm looking for? Functionality of the subtle body and the integration of the subtle body and the physical body. I hope that wasn't too complex.
I think it's amazing. I mean, for me, now I'm right there with you. We'll get listener feedback. I think, if you guys have to play this a couple of times, just keep playing it. What kept popping into my head as you were talking about shifting, this idea of teaching your patients, right, to do this themselves and to live this way is, to me, it's the equivalent of you're teaching them to fish, right?
Yes.
You're not just giving them a meal, you are teaching them to fish. And so I love that. It's amazing.
It's so much more fun for everybody involved. And I would say I'm not really teaching. Well, there are some pieces. I feel like it's more like, let's remember together. This is nothing new about this. And yet osteopathy has some particularly unique ways of addressing to problems that are unique to modern times, because our anatomy has changed, our development has changed. We have literally, ways that probably many of your listeners have heard about this real significance of nasal breathing and the tongue being able to relate to the roof of the mouth. And there are ways that the tongue is now held down by vestiges of tissues that should have not come into adult life or in physical form. So we have people whose tongues are tied down much more frequently, related to, we think, diet and probably environmental toxins, and however it is that original blueprint becomes a little bit distorted. And this is going back, well over 100 years as we've moved into modern life and through the Industrial Revolution. We really have some problems unique to modern life that did not exist when yoga and qigong were developed. And so I do a lot of work with people understanding this, correcting or responding as much as possible to correcting that mechanism of intelligence, of this connection of the tongue to the palate and the depth of the relevance to it. So this is a take home for the audience.
Yes.
However it is, you get your palate, your tongue to rest completely across the roof of your mouth. It's a little bit disorienting. I have images. I have a wonderful article on my website called "Your Swallow, Smile, and Sleep Are More Related Than You Think." So if you touch into this and vibe on it, don't expect to understand it completely in this podcast, but there's a reference there that kind of breaks down all the pieces with a ton of studies. Over 300 studies are attached to that article. So this resting of your tongue on the roof of your mouth, and in this moment, noticing if that contact actually has you feel a little bit more present and able to feel the ground. It's profound. And in Vedic teachings, there's a chakra in the roof of the mouth. And this contact with, which means every time you swallow, there's some pressure. There's almost like a pulsing of the palate that actually opens up the whole head. When we talk about cranial osteopathy, we're really talking about wave transmissibility. It's actually almost like a viscosity shift where the bones fill with this, vital energy, and they actually begin to feel moldable and respond as if they're moldable. That's how we work with that. We work with that cranial mechanism, which is a misnomer because it occurs in every part of the body. This breath, not breath, in the actual structure. So your tongue on the roof of your mouth, I say, it's like having an osteopath living in your head. You're your own osteopath. And once that connection is reestablished, you don't have to really think about it. There's a fairly significant northward force with each swallow that maintains this breath capacity in the skull, which then translates to the rest of the body. So this is a must have, must do. And it's really just so fun to explore it, and it feels amazing as well. So when I talked about that story of that woman where that pilot light came on, and that was an activation of basically she came back into present time and space. We talk about this in osteopathy. We term the central channel, this river of vital energy through the center of the body. We call it the midline. In Vedic teachings, it's called Shushumna. It's called Zongmai in Taoist teachings. It's people say, oh, that's yoga. No, that's life. That's what it is. And we all have different vocabulary.
Sure.
So this tongue palate connection is absolutely essential to maintaining that patency of that flow. And it's also the way in Vedic teachings that the heart communicates with the pineal and the intuition.
I love that.
It's really potent. So it's like, well, the one way you could think about it is intuition is like, it's like a gateway. It's like a portal, and you're granted entry to the degree that your heart is actually driving the whole of you, because then your spirit knows that you will use information responsibly. Or I have this whole idea in my mind. I don't know if everyone would agree with it, but it feels very profound and central to awake life, living and healing. Yeah. The heart being able to, yeah. So the tongue somehow has to do with the heart being activated as almost the sun of the solar system, of the entirety of the subtle body, chakras and meridians. And then what it allows us to do is connect our connection with the higher realm to which is the yang pole. We're talking about yin and yang. We're right down here in the basis of the entirety of existence. And then the planet, which is the feminine pole. And then we exist as a connection between heaven and earth. That's our job description.
So beautiful. And I'm always talking to my clients about, and this is just, it's our times, right? With like, the answers are in your head, right? Everybody's trying to intellectualize their healing and their answers and their, and it's the heart. That's where the answers are.
It's the body holds, like when they say, oh, our brains only use 10% of our potential. Yeah. And in my mind, it's a perfect metaphor or analogy, because 90+% in my mind of our intelligence is not in the mind. It's in the body knowing. Yeah, we'd be in a lot better shape on this planet if we could just get that one thing. And the tongue is related to that. It's related to our ability to actually hear that voice, almost like it's a frequency that we don't have access to, this broader knowing. And most would say, oh, this is a connection to the spiritual realm. And I would say, yeah, sure. Connection to something much larger than ourselves, of which we are an integral part. So no separation. Once we log on to the central channel above and below, and the heart sort of organizes all of it, we are one with everything. Yeah. And then diagnoses just kind of aren't relevant.
Who cares?
In that realm.
Right.
Yeah. Your body's like, that's great. I am myself. I have returned to my original self, and our capacity for healing, once we're actually one with all of the forces of nature, which are infinitely powerful and infinitely intelligent, there's actually nothing that isn't possible. I'm feeling the magnitude of that statement. It's the realm of miracles for sure. And I consider miracles, that's our actual world and life. And then we're doing this other thing most of the time, which is presents difficulties and challenges, puzzles, and, things to be, it's all purposeful. It's all our learning and growing terrain. The difficulties of the physical plane is our, it's where we get, we're grown. We're getting grown by this.
We are getting grown. We're always getting grown, which is good, because I don't want to be done yet. growing.
It's fascinating. It's fascinating. So once the heart activates, you approach the entire challenge as it's exciting. It's like, oh, versus you collapse with fear. This heart shifts the entire the entire experience of being in a body is quite magical and mystical and wondrous and fairly unanswerable. Oh, entirely unanswerable. But once you're in the heart, answers aren't relevant. It's not it's questions that are relevant. It's curiosity that's relevant. Experience and adventure and
connection.
Exactly.
Love it.
Exactly.
Amazing. So trainable exercise, right? As a practice, even just taking that step of tongue to palate throughout the day to read, because it is a retraining for those that haven't ever given it a thought before.
I have a whole DIY do-it-yourself little section in that article on my website, flowismedicine.com. And I want to say that it's so powerful mechanically, because if you understand this topic at its deepest level, you realize no single person would have crowded teeth if this mechanism were in place. So if a listener out there has had a very significant orthodontic history, and I hear things like, oh, I failed braces twice or 3 times and I had headgear, and they have that if you're trying to solve a health issue and all of that is in your history, I really, really highly recommend you find an osteopath that can help you through that. And cranialacademy.com.org is a great place to actually put your zip code in and find a physician in your area that can help you start to sort that out. And interestingly, it doesn't matter what the disorder is, but if I can get someone tongue to palate functional and get this central channel connecting the pelvis and the cranium, the largest mechanical hinges in the body, they must be breathing together. They must be, integrated. At that point, it's almost that like the life force engine turns on, and then the problem list becomes not as relevant. Yeah.
I love that. That's amazing. And I keep thinking about the field of biological dentistry, right? This is the kind of newer approach. And I'm one of those people that they pulled molars because my mouth was crowded, and I know so much more now. I'm like, oh boy, that was all done wrong and not to my benefit, my health benefit. But I love that, my dentist checks for tongue tie and apnea and narrow jaw and crowding and refers to get those things corrected. But even just, I challenge listeners, if you haven't already done it while you're listening, put your tongue on the roof of your mouth for a few minutes, just feel what you feel. Just allow to see if you feel anything different other than the roof of your mouth with your tongue, but in your heart, in your body, because it is such a simple thing, but it can be so profound.
It's so profound. It is actually the contact itself mimics the neurological effect of breastfeeding, which is innately so deeply, calming. So the tongue palate contact also begins to reset the nervous system. If you have people who don't settle and they don't sleep well, hence the name of the article, your smile, swallow, and sleep are more related than you think. This is if they're breathing through their mouth and their tongue is not resting on their palate at all times, aside from eating and talking, they're going to be more easily destabilized. And then you have diagnoses. I actually had a kid who had pandas. It's a complex, pediatric recurrent infection and autoimmune condition. And he had this. He was a mouth breather, and he had no discernible connection of communication between his pelvis and his head. I just did that one thing in 1 or 2 sessions with him to, till I could feel the circuit activate. And then he was taping his mouth at night, which I explain is a very standard treatment at this point. I explain it in that article. And that was the end of his pandas. That was just the end of it. 3 months of antibiotics, miserable kid, not sleeping, not doing well in school, having, inability to socialize. And yeah, it's so deep. It's so deep. I'm shouting from the rooftops right now. Please pay attention to
Wow.
this.
And for people that don't know about mouth taping, I have to, we have to touch on it. Explain.
Sure.
Yeah, because it's
there's a relevance to the response of the brainstem and the breath mechanism and the sort of driving of the whole neurologic system, where if the lips are touching, there's some activation of this memory of a functional breath. So it's really at rest, all of you out there, noticing if your lips are touching. And if I'm actually inhaling through my mouth a little bit today. I don't know if you can hear that, but the breath should, I'm a little stuffed up today. I also talk about how to clear the nose. That's a whole different topic. I have all of this actually in a training I have online that we can speak more to at the end. And noticing if you're breathing through your nose and your lips are touching, and the tape almost trains that us to default with a lip seal, and it requires that we breathe through our nose at night. I have people just try it for a half an hour during the day to notice, just so they internalize, oh, this actually feels safe. Well, ultimately, it doesn't only feel safe, it almost feels like a swaddle. Like without having it, I personally, now I'm back in fog country, so I tend to actually sometimes end up breathing through my mouth unknowingly. And the tape that I do is it just feels like a really beautiful support. This is one of these topics and things that just wasn't relevant in the traditional times of ancient medicine, but now it's a really, really big thing. So there are products on the market. I think I've listed options on, I don't make any money on these things, but I list my favorite products on my website under items we like, something like that. I end up using just a sport tape. That's ultimately my favorite. Micropore medical tape, surgical tape is probably the most accessible, and you can just get it at your local drugstore. And then some people have issues with the adhesive. So, you need to find the one that just feels right for you.
Do you have any, this is like really getting down to but any tips or tricks for the men that have stubble or beards or facial hair, or because this is where I've had challenges with clients in the past with mouth tape?
Yeah. There's actually a product called Somnifix, I think, that's just fitted to the lips.
Just
itself.
the lips.
And it has a little, it has a little slit. And so there's actually a sense that you could breathe if you wanted to, but with the lips actually sealed, it works well. And it actually comes, and the directions are, it has an arch shape, and the directions say put it down. And people are like, I look like I'm frowning. And honestly, I just think, why don't they just turn it upside down? It doesn't make a difference. So
those are the direction followers. They're in their heads.
Turn that frown upside down.
Awesome. Yeah. Love that recommendation. It's this could be a huge spiral. So we'll shift back from there. But because again, and I do think it's the same mindset we've been trained to in allopathic medicine, right? Go to the doctor and have them fix you. And so for me, the gigantic gift of this conversation is that we don't need, yes, professionals can help us get back, in alignment and connected again, but that it's not you fixing your patients, it's you giving them that experience and then
Yeah.
supporting them and doing that for themselves.
I think I have a great analogy for this. I think of it as being a writer, and you're the author of your own book, and the editor is an absolutely essential piece. You will never be the fresh set of eyes that looks at your work. And so it's a partnership, but you're the driver. It's your book.
Love it. And it's perfect. It's beautiful. Amazing. So before, and you already have, but I want you to pick or have the opportunity to maybe even surprise me with something different. But
I got something for you. Oh, go ahead. Finish your question.
Well,
Finish your question.
Ask for one step listeners can start today.
Yes. Besides the tongue business, it's there are all these little pieces, and my body's telling me right now the next relevant one is to talk about. This is so beautiful. This is such a beautiful concept, because for me, our profession, osteopathy, is bone. It's not about bones. It's about fluids and energy and organs and how did that happen? And now I get it in a way. For me, it's relevant. It makes sense that the bones are the ground. It's like the ground that we carry in our own bodies. And when a person is truly integrated in this physical, subtle body blending way of existing, it starts to resonate in the bones, and it's almost like the bones anchor the setting. It's almost like once the song of your integrated self includes the bones, and this is spoken to in the ancient medicines. They talk about bone breathing in some version of bone breathing. And so, imagine you work in a skyscraper. You may not be able to touch the ground with bare feet to reset yourself, and you can maintain this song in your bones. The one, I guess, way I would say this is an elusive concept into experience it is that what has that occur is that your attention is connected to your cells. So all of you out there, as you have your tongues seeking this connection with your palate as a resting behavior, notice if you have an ability to feel or imagine feeling some awareness of every cell in your body, and then your sense of connection to your bones. And bone breathing is an actual thing. It's spoken to in Vedic philosophy, Taoist philosophy. And, the way I would say, it's happening is that you feel vibration. You begin to feel humming. And ultimately, once we are really fluidized, that's why I call my whole school is flow is medicine. Once we actually shapeshift from particle to light to our actual selves, to our there's nothing that isn't fluid, and this is revealed in physics and mathematics. We are actually fluids with a sense of solidness that is actually imaginary, and it's contextual. That once we begin to resonate our vital energy, the frequency of our being resonating in our bones, we begin to really be able to hold our ground. And it almost doesn't matter where you are, because you can connect to that, electrically above and below in a way that is the frequency or the transmission, the actual resonance of that begins to be held in the bones, and then we're here. Yeah.
And now I understand osteopathy.
Well, that's my version.
But I mean, I love that. It just gave me this whole other.
It's so profound,
broader, more profound understanding. I love
irony is all of this most basic pretty much completely obvious stuff to our higher self is this advanced esoteric,
Well, sure,
understanding. It's so
because we're not
paradoxically.
living thousands of years ago before the rest of all that noise got in the way.
That's
Yeah.
right. That's right.
It's amazing.
Yeah. So did I answer your question?
You did.
Is
You
that-
did. It's
Well, yeah.
fantastic. And I have to ask for listeners that are listening on the go, where's the best place to find you?
My website is flowismedicine.com, and I love meeting people. I'm actually creating a community of providers that come in, and this entire training is an actual top shelf CME program that I would say a person could make their way through it in a couple of weeks, but I wouldn't advise that. I'd advise to extend your window of fun to, it's actually a forever. We meet once a week on Saturdays and actually practice the skills. We drop into an actual healing experience and then speak to the elements that arise and train. It's a training. It's like the gym. You actually get to practice the skills, and mostly it's a community, a really beautiful, connected community of, and then it's very social and playful. And I loved how this all manifested for me when COVID hit, that I actually I had the time to build it out. I'd been thinking about it for years. And then I thought, wow, this is so beautiful. I'm finding these, physicians and all over the country who maybe were kind of functioning in a vacuum and didn't really have connection to like minds and like tribe. And then there's an integration between the physician and patient world. We're all patients. I don't love that distinction. I actually feel like there are many non-physicians also in the community. They all come because they resonate with the level that we're working at. And I'm going to say something really funny to the world right now. My non-physician participants rock. The physicians have a harder time getting out of our heads, myself included, because we're just wired that way. And we, practiced being so intellectual for so long that we're a bit more challenged with that shift from thinking to feeling.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I love it. Michelle, thank you so, so much. You have shared amazing gold and wisdom with us today. And I'm excited to listen to this again. I know I have pieces of this I'm taking forward to incorporate in my journey. So I'm very grateful for you.
I'm very grateful. I actually feel like I had a healing. I'm very like awake now, and I'm just, my body feels amazing, and I feel like we just really dropped into a beautiful place, and that's always a function of whoever's present and what their heart brings.
Yeah, I as well. I feel grounded and open and excited to carry this forward. So thank you so much.
Oh, thank you so much. Thank you for the invitation. I'm feeling very blessed.
For everyone listening, remember you can get the transcripts and show notes by visiting inspiredliving.show. I hope you had a great time and enjoyed this episode as much as I did. Listen to it again.
Thank you for listening to Julie Michelson's Inspired Living with Autoimmunity. Did you enjoy this episode? Please like, share, and subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts. If you'd like to get a transcript of this and every other episode, just head on over to inspiredliving.show or click on the link in this episode's description. There, you can also find everything we discussed in this episode, including links and information about our guest. You can even send in your questions to be answered by Julie in a future episode. That's inspiredliving.show. Until next time, this is Julie Michelson's Inspired Living with Autoimmunity podcast, helping you take your power back.